I wanted to make this video about the 40 series torque converter that I bought recently. I happened to buy the one from Go Power Sports. There's others out there, and I think that generally speaking, the operation and the function of them is all identical, but I ended up buying this one. The engine that I'm putting it on is a Briggs Vanguard motor. This one's an 18 horsepower. I figured that the 40 series torque converter was probably my best bet, and really it was the only option I was finding out there. This is a Comet brand torque converter, and they do identify that it can be used up to 18 horsepower. There might be varying opinions out there of that, but they actually specifically say up to 18, so I felt confident buying this for this motor. It's kind of a large size go-kart, and it's not done yet, so I won't have a video on the kart itself anytime soon running, but I might be able to get something put together eventually. Anyway, so I watched a whole lot of videos, YouTube, even other videos on just trying to educate myself on this clutch system. And really all the videos identify installation as being really cut and dry. But I found myself oftentimes being more confused at the conclusion of a lot of these videos I was watching. But you know, there's some real smart people out there too who I reached out to on social media, and of course I got to give credit to those people along the way who helped me to figure out the actual correct way to install this clutch, because there is a right way and a wrong way. So I wanted to share those things that I found. I've already got the backing plate bolted to the case. You can see the plate comes with a series of bolt holes to accommodate a variety of bolt patterns on any number of engines that the customer might have. Okay, so this came from Go Power Sports assembled just like this. The driven clutch was already installed to this backing plate, and it's installed and shipped to you with what's called outboard. All right, this is the spring portion of this clutch, and it is facing out from the engine. So that reference outboard, that's what that means. If this driven was flipped the other way around, it would be considered inboard. Okay, so for terminology purposes, that's what I'm talking about. Go Power Sports installs the driven on the back plate outboard. Now, that's actually reverse from the way the Comet engineer's drawings show this system being set up. Comet Engineering manufactures these pieces, and I'll include a link to that in my video, but it actually shows this clutch being installed inboard on a jack shaft, right? So essentially it is on a jack shaft, right? This is considered a jack shaft, but it's in this plate, right? It really simplifies things for the customer not to have to set up an independent jack shaft. But you could imagine if you would flip this driven, right? This spring pack would force this pulley to be out much further, right? But with the driven set up this way, you can really choke up on this back plate and reduce this space here. And now that comes into play when you would go to install your driver, right? Because if you had your driven flipped and then your pulley was way out here, some of these crankshafts on these motors here would not be long enough to shim your driver out to the appropriate distance so that the belt lines up. So this becomes the most practical way to set it up on this plate. There's no problem with that. I mentioned that it is set up according to Comet's prescribed installation instruction. For all intents and purposes, this is set up backwards. That can be overcome by this reverse wound spring. This is included with this driven from Go Power Sports. You don't have to worry about that. When this is set up outboard, it requires the reverse wound spring. That's done. It's shipped to you that way. All right, let's move along. The instructions given are pretty minimal, and it's hard to see. Let me see if we can get a little better view of this. It's really hard to see, but it looks like, okay, because obviously this is the driver. Here's the motor. Here's the driver pulley. Here's the driven pulley. It appears that the inside edge of this driver pulley right here is set in a little bit closer to the engine than the inside edge of this driven pulley. I don't know. I'm doing my best to show this on this phone that I'm filming it on. If you all can see that, that's what this depiction appears to show. Now, let's get back to terminology, just so we're not mistaking. We talked about this type of setup being referred to as outboard, right? These essentially, they're both clutches, both of them. They're both clutches, and they are what establishes the gearing, right? As the engine RPMs, they change, and that's what's so awesome about these things. Now, let's introduce another term, right? So, as this particular clutch engages, this pulley, this side of the pulley actually draws outward, right? And you can see this spring right here, and you can see the ramp and the cams. RPM causes this pulley to draw outward. And so what you end up with initially, like at idle and low RPM, you have a belt that rides at the top of this pulley, like at the outermost diameter of it. But as this engine RPMs and this side of the pulley opens up, now the belt falls down deeper into the trough of the pulley, changing the gear ratio, right? That's when it actually starts picking up speed and going really fast, is when the belt is all the way down in there toward the center of the pulley. Now, oppositely, you have this driver clutch. It starts out in an open position, essentially. And just for assistance here, I'm just going to throw this on the crank there, just to hold it up for me. It starts out in an open setting, and this belt operates down in the depth of the pulley, initially and at lower RPM. But as the engine starts RPMing, this side of the pulley moves inward, right? It moves inward and begins to essentially pinch that belt, right? This side stays static. It does not move. This is the dynamic side of this clutch. Now, the sides of this pulley are beveled or like conical, so to speak. And once this dynamic side responds to RPM and begins pinching that belt, the belt, because of the shape of these pulley sides, has no choice but to ride upward. And now the belt, which once was at low RPM operating down into the depth of the pulley, it draws upward, right? Draws upward, and that changes the gear also. So you have two clutches that are changing the gear. Now, look at it like this. When I'm going to come around the back. In these pulleys, I don't, like I said, I just threw that on there to help me hold it up. That pulley, when it's set up outboard, okay, upon engagement, this side opens up. This pulley, when you install it like this lug side outward, upon engagement, this side pinches in. So you have this opposing movement. Does that make sense? You have this opposing movement. Let's see if I can, this side moves in upon engagement, and at RPM, this side moves out. So eventually, at some point, or at every point, you're going to have conflict in the belt. There's going to be conflict. If the drive moves inward and the driven moves outward, it's going to do this. Right? It has no choice but to do that. So these instructions do not indicate exactly how to line up these pulleys in terms of the shimming, right? Go Power Sports does include this big stack of humongous washers, and I think the general recommendation is 7 of them, right here. Place the 7 1-inch washers on the crankshaft to bring the driver clutch in line with the driven clutch, with the driven unit as shown in the picture below. Bolt the driver to the crankshaft using either one of the 2 bolts provided, depending on your engine application. Might be a different crank thread. So what I ran into, okay, some engines, it might take all 7. It might, I don't know. All I can speak to is this Briggs motor. I found that I know for a fact this Briggs motor, it has a shorter exposed crankshaft snout than the like Predators or other engines. Once you bolt that 1/2-inch plate on, I have 2.5 inches of crank snout exposed. Now, that's enough for me to do what I needed to do. But the other thing that comes into play, and I've got some other washers on there that I ended up buying separate from the parts store. There's the base of the crankshaft snout up in there. It's got what I call a shoulder, right? The crankshaft length and the position of the shoulder varies from motor to motor. Like this Briggs is what it is, right? That shoulder is kind of deep up into there, where it's really unable to be seen behind these washers. Now, when I began by using the included Go Power Sports washers, as you see, they're a little loose, and that's fine. They work, but they're a little loose, right? You put it on and gravity causes them to fall. So when you put on this stack of 7 washers and they're all just hanging down, right? The problem I encountered is because the washers actually went up into the hole there, and if they were beautifully and perfectly centered, they wouldn't have caused me the problems that I had. But it's tough to get them to exactly center on this crankshaft. Now these washers here that I got, they're a tight fit on that crank. I bought those at the local hardware store. And I bought enough of them to stack them out to bring out that shimmage flush with this plate surface. Then I went in and I used these, because what I was finding was when I was shoving these in that hole, they would droop, right? They would fall and droop because they're a little bit loose, and they would contact this plate. And then once I bolted this on and tightened it up, now I have secured all of these washers in a fixed fashion, where when I went to start the pull rope, I've got this big stack of washers eccentrically off. It's eccentrically off on this crankshaft, and it was rubbing this plate, and it was really tough to pull, and I didn't know what was going on until I kind of delved into it a little bit. So issue number one I had. Okay, let's move ahead to installation. What I found on a lot of these videos I was watching, they were indicating that the lineup should be the back of the pulleys, right? The back of this to the back of this. And let's take a look at that. There we go. Pretty close. That's actually a little off. Essentially, we'd be making the pulleys absolutely parallel to this back plate. Okay, let's pretend that we're gonna do it that way. And I'm gonna pause this video periodically and show actually the result of this. I'm gonna start this motor up and we're gonna rev it up. Okay, so we've lined it up, back plate to back plate. Now let's take a step back and see what we got here. What we got is pulleys that don't even come close to lining up, right? You get parallel. They don't even come close to lining up. I mean, I know this pulley is wider and it eventually pinches up, and you might say, well, it's fine. Once it pinches up, it's fine. Well, when this pinches up, this draws out. So here again, you have the crooked belt situation. Comet, again, identifies the correct installation for this to be inboard, and this to be mounted like this dynamic side facing out. The alternative is to leave that installed outboard and then simply flip the driven. Flip the driven, right? Now you still got to shim it properly. In my case, I have to shim it enough so this big lug bolt down there on the driven doesn't contact the back plate and create clearance issues. So I got the washers to do that. And I've been through all this. I know my correct shimming, but I just wanted to show what I encountered from the beginning of my struggles. Now, the problem is, right, everyone is pretty quick to see, and now your pulleys are way the hell off, right? The only way to overcome this is to shim your driven outward to line up. Initially, I didn't think I would be able to do that with this jack shaft that's included with the kit. But there's quite a bit of thread on this outside, and there's quite a bit of thread on this side. I actually found that I was able to do that. So I backed this nut off quite a bit, and then I backed this nut off quite a bit. Well, actually, I took this nut off and I removed the driven, and I had to end up throwing a sleeve over this jack shaft that was like exactly 1 3/8 thick. It took 1 3/8 inches to get this driven pushed out to where it would line up with this driver installed the way it is now. All right, so you're able to do that with the length of this jack shaft. All right, and I'd like to show you that. I'm going to pause it.